There's a Venn diagram of people that have donated to Jim Jordan and people that have cases up with the FTC about this right now, and there's probably a lot of overlap.
It's just a circle.
It's just a circle. It's just a circle. Welcome to Critical Culture. I'm Travis.
I'm Josh.
And we're here today to talk about trust, specifically antitrust and big tech.
Antitrust.
Yeah. But first, let's talk about creator tools. From a creator tech space, how do you like Riverside FM? This is the second time we've used it for recording an episode.
It's painless. It really is. I mean,
yeah.
From what we were doing before to Riverside, I mean, you click record and off you go. I mean, it's not much more than that.
It saves us the hassle of sharing files. And then, I was the one that was editing, so I had to line it up just right. And it was kind of a hassle. It's kind of nice that the platform takes care of that for us. Mm-hmm. And I haven't even gotten into some of the advanced features where it can clip out shorts, 60-second pieces for promotionals or whatever, or do the final edit for a podcast. I like playing around in Premiere Pro, so I'm still holding on to that piece. But they do allow, I actually download the videos and a project file in Premiere Pro format.
And that's handy.
So I can go right into editing. So that's kind of nice. Yeah. And I feel like I've already gotten our money's worth out of using Riverside FM. I think if I get used to those other features, it'd just be icing on the cake.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it definitely seems that way. You do most of you do all of the editing. Who am I kidding? I don't do any of it. So I will take your word on that. But just from my side of things, I connect up and we're off and running.
Yeah, and especially the episode I did with Emily, who's not as technical as us. She didn't have OBS Studio and all these things that we use and fancy cameras. It was easy for her to do it. So if we do other ones with guests, or I've got another podcast, 21st Century Adulting, that I'm doing, and I'm lining up some guests for that, I'm definitely glad that I've got this platform to use to record it.
Yeah, no, that's great.
So there we go with new and news. And now on to antitrust. We're going to cover a couple of things today. We're just going to lightly cover the concept of antitrust in the United States and maybe compare it a little bit to the rest of the world. And then we're going to discuss primarily two cases. The Microsoft case from, how long ago was that?
Ooh, it started in 1990? Yes, 1990.
Whoa. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, these things are not quick. So, so we'll cover the Microsoft case, and then we'll talk about not one, but two cases that are against Google. One for search and the other one for some of their advertising technology stack. But first, we'll talk a little bit about antitrust in general.
Yeah.
So what is the purpose of antitrust in the United States?
So antitrust, which is often referred to as competition law, encompasses a set of laws and regulations designed to foster fair and open competition in the marketplace. It's also think of monopoly. It's synonymous with monopolies. The primary goal of antitrust law is to prevent anti-competitive practices that can harm consumers and leading to higher prices, lower quality goods, services, fewer choices, and with the lack of competition comes reduced innovation. So it's a means to continue fair competition across a market. And then, of course, not allowing a single player to take advantage of consumers.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that I was reading. In the United States, there's really this emphasis on benefit of consumers.
Right.
About the consumers. And there's some things that these antitrust cases, whether it is preemptive, like company A, like Facebook, wants to buy Instagram, versus like after the fact, did they do something illegal and break it up? Some of that is done through the Department of Justice, some of it through the FTC. Is that the Federal Trade Commission?
Yes.
I think, yes. So there's two different groups in the U.S. government that do it. The concept of what is good for the consumer is very important in the United States, where from what I understand in Europe, it's also very much about fairness of the playing field. It's almost more kind of preemptive, like they're going to make sure that there is a fair playing field between companies before a monopoly could advance. And there's a distinction there that I think that's part of the reason why, especially with these big tech companies, a lot of them are in the United States, in part because the United States has always been at the forefront of this kind of technology, and also because the government has been a little bit more like, hey, if this is still good for the consumer, we're going to let it fly, and we'll see what happens. And that's good and it's bad. It's good because you want your country to have the dominant companies in this space, but at the same time, they become so dominant that they can carry that dominance over into other fields, and that can cause problems with competitions and ultimately not benefit the consumers. And once you've let the cat out of the bag, it can be hard to stuff it back in.
Right. Yeah. So you kind of touched on it a little bit, but there's three main federal antitrust statutes in the U.S. And they really kind of all happened within a 25-year period of each other, but that's kind of set the standard for what we consider antitrust and monopolies. We've got the Sherman Act, the Clayton Act, and the FTC Act, or Federal Trade Commission Act. Sherman Act was in 1890. Give you the description here is basically it prohibits contracts, combinations, and conspiracies in restraint of trade and monopolization, attempts to monopolize or conspiracies to monopolize. That's where we get monopolies from. Clayton Act, 1914. It addresses specific practices that could harden competition, such as anti-competitive mergers and acquisitions, tying agreements, and exclusive dealings. So that's where we get a lot of that federal review of two large companies merging, like cell phone carriers of, is that the 2010s, 2000s, where we had all those mergers, all the carriers? I can't remember, but that would
Yes.
definitely be part of the Clayton Act there. And finally, the Federal Trade Commission Act of 1914. It established the FTC and prohibits unfair methods of competition and unfair or deceptive acts or practices. So those are kind of the three pillars that support antitrust laws in the United States. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I think all in response to certain events that happened, and all getting more specific as time goes on. You go back to like the initial one, the Sherman Antitrust Act, and again, two main sections. The anti-competitive agreements, this isn't even talking about a monopoly. It's talking about a pair of companies that maybe have agreements to say, we're going to do price fixing.
Right.
We're not going to compete on price. We want to make a certain amount of profit. So we're going to deal behind doors and make sure that prices don't go too low. Bid rigging, if they're, again, very similar to price fixing, things of that nature. Whereas the second part really addressed monopolization, trying to monopolize any part of interstate or foreign trade or commerce. The Clayton Antitrust Act gets a little bit more specific. It prevents things like sellers from charging different prices to different buyers for the same goods. Obviously, like if you're selling in bulk, those are things that they can do, and you can charge a different price for the goods. But if it's the same good to different people for different prices, that's something that can be anti-competitive in nature. The tying agreements and exclusive dealing, where like you buy this, you also have to buy this. And some of that is where, like in Google's case, where they were potentially getting in trouble for some of what they're doing, like with Apple, to be paying so much money to become the default search engine on the iOS platform.
Sure.
Also in the Clayton Act is around mergers and acquisitions, where the effect may be substantially to lessen competition or tend to create a monopoly. And this is where, again, I think in the United States, some of that they let fly, because in some cases, especially, it's often in a case where it's newer technology like social media, the people making these decisions maybe don't fully understand the impact of some of these things, right? And they can also say, well, it's no big deal. It's just a site where people are sharing pictures. Who cares? It's not going to make a difference. Let them buy it. It's going to be good for competitors or good for consumers because it's going to be easier for them to be on both platforms. Where in the long run, it's building a monopoly through mergers and acquisitions. So the key differences with Clayton, it gets much more specific. It's supposed to be, again, that kind of preventative in nature where I think we've gotten away from where, it's supposed to prevent monopolies from forming. But the Department of Justice and the FTC, I think, has backed off quite a bit. If a company can make an argument where it's good for consumers, in the United States, it would fly. In Europe, it probably wouldn't. Sure. It also has civil remedies, unlike the Sherman Act, which just has criminal penalties for certain violations. The Clayton Act primarily provides for similar remedies, such as injunctions and damages for private parties harmed by violations. So a little bit more teeth in the enforcement. So and the FTC Act just kind of builds on that. It's even more specific, and it established the FTC to be a key enforcement agency and provide a broader prohibition against unfair competition and deceptive practices. So that is antitrust in the United States. We don't hear about it too often, and when we do, it's usually about really big tech companies, and it's always this kind of after the fact. I can't remember the last time I heard of a merger being blocked.
Right. It seems that just a little news that's happening with our current administration. It looks like the House GOP is trying to roll this back, trying to get rid of some of this antitrust information. We've got some Judiciary Chair Jim Jordan doesn't like the antitrust law and is trying to roll back our antitrust protections.
Yeah, I read about that. So again, we talked about there's the Federal Trade Commission and the Department of Justice, and they've got some overlap and some difference between what they do. And Jim Jordan, not a big fan of him. No. I don't know many people that are. is not a fan of Section 5 of the FTC Act, which prohibits unfair methods of competition. I guess no method of competition is unfair in his eyes. Yeah. So what he's trying to do, and this is used to limit, particularly Section 5 was used to litigate against pharmacy benefit managers. It's in the antitrust case against Amazon, another one against Syngenta regarding exclusive dealing in seeds and chemicals. So there are active cases around this. And what he wants to do is basically get rid of half of the enforcement arm here, saying we don't need two different places dealing with this and having this type of redundancy, which we absolutely do. He wants to move all antitrust authority and staff out of the FTC to the Department of Justice, shut down the Bureau of Competition at the FTC, and end the ability of the FTC to accept merger filing forms. So they do kind of work in tandem right now with mergers. They both kind of look at them. If one has questions and one seems more well-suited to deal with a specific case, they'll kind of take it over. I don't think there's hard and fast rules about how this works. So we do need two different groups to look at these things and deal with different aspects of antitrust behavior. Part of the problem here is if they were to abolish this part of the FTC, a bunch of these current cases would go to the Department of Justice, where the Department of Justice doesn't have the charter or the authority to even deal with that case. Mm-hmm. So, the first thing that's going to happen is these companies that are being looked at right now are going to go right back to the courts and say, the Department of Justice has no ability to deal with this, so our case should be dropped.
Right.
And likely their case will be dropped.
Right. It's a half-baked idea.
So,
it
is. It's a half-baked idea. I think if we used a couple of minutes and looked at who his campaign contributors are, we might find some of the people.
I bet you there's a few crossovers
that are up
there.
Right now. Yeah. I think there's a Venn diagram of people that have donated to Jim Jordan and people that have cases up with the FTC about this right now. And there's probably a lot of overlap.
It's just a circle.
It's just a circle. It's just a circle. I still want to call it a Venn diagram, but let's just call it a circle. There's complete overlap. So,
well, that brings us to Google, Travis. I hear you know a few things about the Google antitrust cases.
The United States versus Google LLC is an antitrust case that was brought forth in January of 2023, accusing Google of illegally monopolizing advertising technology in violation of Sections 1 and 2 of the Sherman Antitrust Act, which is separate from the one that says they have an illegal monopoly in the search engine market. So a little bit of background. Beginning in the 2000s, Google gradually increased its presence in the ad tech market. They were giving away product for free, right? It's like, why does Google allow you to search for free? It's just plain white background and text on a page. They needed eyeballs. They needed attention. They got it all. And then they started selling ads and they started gobbling up the ad market. So they bought companies like DoubleClick, Invite Media, and AdMeld. They did get some criticism from privacy groups around the time who petitioned the FTC to scrutinize some of these deals, but ultimately they were approved. And we're talking like multi-billion-dollar deals. I think the DoubleClick one was $3.1 billion.
30. Oh, no, yeah. I'm sorry. Yes, you're right. I'm reading the wrong line, but you're right. 3.1 billion.
Yeah. So by 2021, Google's ad tech division was their second largest business behind Google search and generated $31 billion in revenue for the company.
It's almost 32.
Yeah. So that's like 80% of their revenue as of a couple of years ago. This is a big part of what they do is ads. It's after porn, the internet was built on porn. After that, it's all about ads, right? It's all about ads. It funds the internet because we don't want to pay for these services. Just give me services for free. I want free Gmail. I want free search.
Yep.
I want free news. And if I got to put up with some ads to get it, by golly, my eyeballs are yours. So they own the entire stack. They own pieces that are faced towards people that want to buy advertising. They have markets that are for people that want to display advertising. And they've got some magic juju in the middle that kind of makes it all meet. So they really own the whole pipeline for ads. Yeah. And I think an important distinction to make here is they were very dominant, and they still are very dominant in a lot of spaces. But one thing that I think has tempered their dominance has been the rise of social media and the amount of eyeballs that go to social media now. Think about how much time you spend on Facebook or Instagram, Twitter, whatever it is, compared to how much time was on Google and other websites. Now, Google isn't selling ads on Meta's property. Meta is. Right. So from my perspective, it's a different ad market, and it's probably, I could probably look up the statistics, but they've probably had some of their dominance in online advertising taken away. Now, if you talk about online advertising in web pages and text, and even in video with the dominance of YouTube, which is itself social media, they probably still own quite a bit of it.
Right. I would imagine they own the lion's share of ad space between all of their platforms, Alphabet's platforms. But
Yes. And so the way antitrust cases work is they go through this first phase where they determine if they've monopolized something or crossed the line to a point that there needs to be some remedy. And in this case, in August 2024, actually fairly quickly in terms of antitrust cases, it was just over a year. So now both sides have opinions on what should be done to end this monopoly on the ad tech market. Some legal filings recently. And what the Justice Department wants is to strip the advantages it's gained through years of consolidation and buying all of these companies. Their proposal involves breaking their dominance through a three-phase structural remedy. First, level the playing field by forcing Google to give competing ad exchanges and servers real-time access to AdX bidding data through Prebid. Second phase would involve requiring Google to open source its auction logic, the brains behind its ad server. And the third phase would involve full divestiture of both products, with both being put under supervision of a court-appointed trustee and the Department of Justice getting approval of the ultimate buyers. So in terms of addressing this marketplace, I do think that, again, Facebook has eaten into a lot of the advertising market. They're going to see their own day in court with Meta, likely be broken up. I think Zucchini even knows it. He's been quoted as saying it before. AI is going to come in and eat another part of this lunch. Like, I was talking to my brother yesterday, and he now searches for products on ChatGPT and pretty much buys whatever it tells him to buy. I'm sure he does a little bit of research, but he puts a lot of stock in the advice he gets from it. So again, the market is not as great as it was before for this type of thing, but I do think it should be open to a little bit more competition. I was reading an article the other day that talked about how renewable energies really aren't taking off, even though they're cheaper than fossil fuels. And a lot of it has to do with like the structures in place to deal with energy distribution and also profitability. Like, people don't want to invest in, institutional investors specifically don't want to invest in renewables because the profit isn't as high as fossil fuels. So until we can figure that out, we're stuck with fossil fuels. But the part that's related to this is they were talking about electrical distribution and how they try to bring more competition into those markets where you've got producers are separate from distributors of electricity, are separate from the retail outlets that actually will sell electricity to consumers. So they tried to break these things up because, especially in the middle, with the distribution, you're not going to get three companies that are each going to own transmission lines all across California. So if the company that produces the energy also owns the lines, they're going to be the only ones that are selling to consumers, or there's not going to be any competition involved. So this concept of breaking apart this from Google and not just taking the whole guts out and giving it to someone else, but saying, let's take this piece off, let's take this piece off, and now we got three separate pieces. Maybe we get three different people to run it, and there could be more competition in the middle. And I think that's probably a good approach to this. A rule book like what Google can and can't do with ads just isn't going to work. The government's ability to react in this case is going to be too slow.
Right.
And they're not going to be able to keep up with a technology company and, frankly, the market itself, as we've talked about how online advertising, a bunch of it has moved to social media and now onto AI-served ads as well. So they're really pushing for like a structural remedy for this. What does Google want? It's probably something different, right?
To be left alone.
So they don't want to break up. Yeah, they don't want to break up. They're in love with their ad market. I can't blame them. They built a beast. I don't blame them for doing it. Somebody was going to do it, but it probably is time for it to be broken up. They're proposing giving competitors real-time access to the data, which is the first phase, via pre-bid. They're willing to scrap some of the unified pricing rules for like these open web and display ads that they've had since 2019, and drawn a lot of flack from publishers for limiting flexibility and favoring Google. And that's pretty much it. They think that would be enough, but I don't think that that's really the case here. They can still compete in other areas. So there's a big difference between what the Department of Justice wants and Google wants. Google is saying this is focused on solving past problems. Kind of almost sort of agree, but it's still an area where there should be competition. Absolutely. Because it could bleed out into other areas. It also sets the precedence for like how it might work with AI or how it should or could work with Meta. Or other cases, maybe markets could exist that would cover all these types of platforms and there'd be even better competition and ways to advertise that are more favorable to people that want to advertise and people that want to display ads. So it's too early to tell if they're going to break up or if Google is going to get their way and stick with their love of their ad platform. I know whatever happens, it's certainly to be appealed.
Yep.
So I don't think we're going to see an end to this advertising monopoly anytime soon.
Yeah, and if history is any indicator, one of the most well-known cases that, at least I'm aware of, when I think of monopoly and antitrust, the first thing that comes to mind is Microsoft. So there's a lot of parallels between what happened with Microsoft in the 90s and early 2000s, or early aughts, as some say, that kind of echo what's happening with Google right now. Microsoft was initially started investigations the FTC did into Microsoft in 1990. Basically, the argument was that Microsoft was being anti-competitive by including Internet Explorer installed by default, set to default web browser for Windows, its Windows operating system. And the argument was that it was preventing other applications or other browsers from Netscape and Java from being installed or even getting into the market, period. And that's interesting because it's very similar to how Google's other case with search is being approached. Google, the consumer doesn't have a choice because you're handed a solution from the get-go. With Google, it's Google's Chrome is set default to Google search engine, and Microsoft, it was Microsoft's OS setting its default to Internet Explorer. And having it pre-installed ready to go. One of the main arguments that the government made against Microsoft for this was whether or not it was easy. Microsoft's argument was that we're not tying anybody to Internet Explorer. It's really easy to install one of our competitors' softwares. Let us show you. So they presented recordings of the installation process of Netscape Navigator, for instance. And Microsoft's video showed it was painless. In a few seconds, it was installed. There was an icon on the desktop, and it was ready to go. The government did the same process, except it was a completely different outcome. They had to search for Netscape. They had to find it. It was not even clear that it succeeded in its installation, and it took forever for it to load. And basically, at the end of the day, the government accused Microsoft of lying. Microsoft admitted that their video was doctored, and it didn't help their case.
Oh.
So it's just kind of funny, some of these interesting tactics Microsoft tried early on. There's even quotes of the vice president of Microsoft, drawing a blank on his name at the time.
Is it Steve Ballmer?
Was it Steve Ballmer?
No, I know
he was the...
he was one of their big wigs.
I just saw his name. The vice president of Microsoft stating that their intent was to crush and destroy Netscape Navigator.
That sounds... I when you say like executive Microsoft and it's not Bill Gates, I just think of Steve Ballmer like all jacked up on stage. Yeah, let's crush and destroy Netscape. Right? Yeah.
Right? I think that's what everyone's view was.
Yeah.
At least mine was.
Yeah. Oh, I remember those days. It was not easy to get something else on there.
Yeah. Yeah.
For sure.
Right. And Microsoft argued that IE was a feature, not a product. It was a feature.
It's a feature, not a bug.
Right. I'm kidding.
I'm a programmer. That's my line, man.
Yep. Yeah. So what happened throughout this was Microsoft inevitably appealed I should take a step back. They were found to be in violation of antitrust laws, and that they had to split off IE, or could not install IE from the start onto Windows, or package it together. Basically, Microsoft appealed. The case got overturned. The antitrust ruling against them got overturned because one of the judges that was involved made some basically, I'm going to call it clerical. It's not clerical, but judgment errors. Spoke about the case when he shouldn't have, and I'm sorry, I said he. Was it a he?
This is the 21st century. We can be flexible with pronouns.
Yeah, right.
He, she, they, it. They. There you go. Is that a capital T, they?
It is now.
It is now. Right on.
They made some errors, and it forced the case to be overturned. The case was retried, and basically Microsoft prevailed at the end because we get Internet Explorer, now Edge, pre-installed. Ironically, Edge is now based on Chromium, which is what Google Chrome is based on. So it's all full
Which
circle.
is owned by Google.
It's all the same.
For now.
For now.
Which is owned by Google for now.
Right.
But it's interesting that is similar in some ways to Google's other antitrust case on search, right? Because a lot of it has to do with defaults. And I remember one of the things that did come out of that was it was easier to change your default browser and your default mail client and stuff like that in the Windows operating system. They did make some changes, and I think that did open the door for like Firefox and other things to be easily used by people that weren't as tech savvy and didn't know how to go into a registry and change things and all this black magic. And even those kind of screens you see when you initially set up Windows where it's asking about your defaults. And if they don't like your defaults, like I still get it. I got this computer like 6 months ago, and like every month or so I get this kind of restart it and it boots up and it's like, oh, you're not using Office 365. Are you sure you don't want this to be your default? Do you want a free trial? So it's still, even though there's still elements of that, and that's how it's similar to the Google search case is in the Google search dominance antitrust case, the central claim is they unlawfully maintained a monopoly for general search through anti-competitive contracts and practices. So this is the kind of paying billions of dollars a year to mobile phone manufacturers like Apple and web browser developers to make Google the default search engine on their devices and platforms. And mind you, it's easier to change your default on these platforms than it was on Windows back in the day.
Right.
Like it's approachable. You can do it fairly easily, but for like I guess compared to fairly easily for an average computer user back then to like everybody's got smartphones now. Everybody's using browsers. Maybe it's not as easy for everyone. But the point is, the part that's similar is instead of Microsoft favoring themselves, here we have Google paying somebody else to favor Google and saying that is anti-competitive.
Right.
So there were other allegations, the self-preferencing, which is like, we've got Internet Explorer self-installed. It's the default for links. With Google's, it came down to designing its results to favor their own search services like Google Shopping or Google Flights over competitors if people are making searches. And that part just kind of fell away. I don't think it's a major deal because they sell so many ads around those things anyway. They would probably make more money selling ads for Booking.yeah instead of taking people to Google Flights. So I don't think that one became such a big deal. That one, again, they were found liable for anti-competitive practices to maintain their monopoly power. Again, just even more so than with the ad market, with the search, they're kind of saying, hey, search is pretty much dead. There are other search engines out there, and now everyone's going to AI, so don't worry about our search. But some of these AI companies are chiming in and saying, well, Google can use their search monopoly, and this is the other part where it's not just monopolizing the market you're in, but monopolizing the next market too. You do a Google search now and you see Gemini results up at the top, and they can have Gemini embedded in search. They have it embedded in docs. They have it embedded like everywhere they are. They've got agreements. I think they backed off a little bit, but I'm pretty sure they still have some agreements with like Samsung and potentially Apple to have Gemini pre-installed. Not that you can't install apps very easily to get a different AI on there. But they do have some agreements around AI as well. And these AI companies are saying, yeah, the search monopoly, even though things are going to AI, it is a case where they say Google's dominance in search will lead to a dominance in AI.
Sure.
I don't know how much I really believe that. I mean, what do you think about that? You use AI. Which AI do you use, Josh?
I'm with ChatGPT right now. That's what I've been using primarily. So OpenAI is offering.
Okay.
I do use Gemini occasionally, just because I've got a lot of. To be honest with you, I use all of them. I spread the love around, but I'm also I do that in part because I like to compare results across the board. Primarily, I do use ChatGPT, but I'm not a typical user of AI. I don't think.
And it's to be honest, I was reading an article today that talked about how most AI projects fail.
Right.
And they're not nearly as good as people think they are. It was Klarna and some other fairly well-known like internet company were doing AI first and not hiring people, and now it's not working so well.
Right, because
so they're going back to hiring people. So
it's not quite ready for prime time.
Frankly, I use Gemini. I bought into the Google ecosystem, and I see the value of it's everywhere I want it to be, and that's why I like it. I like it in my email. I like it in Docs. I like it standalone. I don't want to have to go over to ChatGPT and do things in a separate browser window and copy and paste and all that stuff. So. I tend to use Gemini more than the others. I've used Copilot. I've tested some of the other ones like Perplexity is pretty good and Claude.
Yep.
But the other AI companies, Google is saying, well, look at all these other AI companies. They're charging for their product. They've got a lot of people using their products. So are we really dominating the paid AI market just because we're giving away a lot of it for free? It's an argument you could make. You could also potentially make that like even with this money that these other companies are charging, they're still losing money hand over fist, which Google did for a long time before it made money. But now if this is a war of attrition, Google's got more money to lose, and it's going to maintain a level of service and a level of use that these other companies might not be able to maintain if people are just like, hey, I can get it for free from Google.
Right.
Or cheaper. So I think there's an argument to be made there. I don't know, like some of the remedies they're talking about in this case really make a ton of sense to me. Stopping them from making third-party payments to make sure that its default search position for devices and browsers. I mean, maybe that's part of what antitrust was supposed to be about. At the very least, it should be very easy, and there should be a list that maybe there shouldn't be a default, and it should be a choice that people have to make.
Like during setup or even on your account preferences when you sign into your iPhone, a new iPhone, you've set in your account somewhere that you want this to be your search, and it automatically applies it as opposed to it being preset regardless of your preference.
Yeah. Right. Requiring Google to spin off its Chrome web browser. It comes preloaded with Google search as the default. It's pretty easy to change that if I'm not mistaken. I can go click here.
What makes this a little interesting
settings.
About Chrome, though, is that the Chromebooks are based off of Chrome, which is akin to an operating system.
Yes.
So that's where we get this parallel back to Microsoft and Windows, right? So they've just built their operating system to be self-contained in the browser. So they're...
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, it's not difficult to change the default, but the browser is obviously designed to work with Google products.
Yes. Well, and that's one of the other potential remedies is potentially requiring Google to sell its Android operating system.
Right.
Which is the most widely used mobile OS, got to be the most widely used OS in general, I would think.
Yeah.
That comes bundled with all these Google apps. And Microsoft didn't have to sell Windows. They did have to open up to say, hey, what about like prompting people for defaults during setup?
Right.
And that's part of it. And it should be, then you also talk about like interoperability. Like, let's make Microsoft Office 365 available as the default on a device. I don't know how much that like the defaults for a doc editor on a phone really matters. It's so easy, and a 2-year-old can install an app on a tablet, for Pete's
That's
sake.
the truth.
And there's no concept of like there's 50 different apps to deal with a .doc file. It just doesn't matter. Most of it's browser based or it's in the app. So they're pretty harsh remedies from Google's perspective. I know another one, OpenAI, was saying, well, maybe Google should just give us access to their data. Say what? Like, I don't.
Right. Oh.
I don't know about that. I'm sure you like that because data is like data and energy and chips. That is like the holy trinity of AI and the AI race is how can you get data besides scraping New York Times illegally
Right.
and downloading a bunch of books
Right.
illegally. Like, to get access to all that data, that doesn't necessarily make sense to me either. So I don't know about the remedies in this one. I think maybe the one I'm most in line with personally is like, hey, they can't pay to be the default anymore. Default's got to be like prompted, and that should maybe be enough for now. I think the market does move pretty fast. I'm not sure what like breaking off other chunks of this from Google necessarily are good for competition or for consumers.
I agree.
Because I mean, Chrome, it's already a free product.
Right. Right. That's true.
Right. Chrome's a free product. Android should and these agreements should go away, and Android should be open enough that it works well with other things. Maybe you don't want anything pre-installed, nothing pre-installed. They can choose some defaults and say, oh, these are your defaults. This is what you like. I'll install it all for you, but not pre-install it. And maybe that would be a fair place to start. So
Yeah. Yeah. That's
we will
one
see.
step, right? Yeah. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, we will see what happens. Maybe if our viewers or our listeners trust us enough, we can talk about like Meta's antitrust trial in a future episode. I think that one's just getting underway. I don't think that's got as much to talk about yet.
Yeah, Meta and I think Amazon's in the same boat there. We're both kind of getting some flack from our FTC and antitrust laws.
Yeah. Yep. Oh, and I do owe the U.S. government an apology. There are some large mergers that were blocked, just none really in the tech sector.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one was Kroger-Albertsons merger.
Oh, right.
That was blocked not too long ago. People care about that.
Yeah.
That's food. But people get hot up about that. They don't care as much about Facebook buying Instagram. They don't see the repercussions of that. But you talk about all the grocery stores being owned by one company.
That's a problem.
People don't want that. There was a U.S. Steel versus Nippon Steel
Yep.
merger was blocked by the Biden administration for national security concerns.
Right. I think
And what else do we see here? Amazon iRobot merger. I didn't even hear about that one. And Kate Spade, Michael Kors merger blocked by the FTC. So it happens, folks. I was wrong. It happens.
rarely, but it happens.
Yes. So, all right. Well, that is all we have today. Thanks for listening, everyone. Until next time.
Till next time. Thanks, everyone.